I grew up in a small, quiet town in an old two-story house with my parents and my older sister, Samantha. Even though she was only 3 years older than me, it always felt like we were living in completely different worlds. My father ran a little café, which was just enough to keep our family going, and my mother helped out there sometimes when she wasn't at home. Our life was simple, nothing fancy, but we had what we needed. Samantha was the one everyone paid attention to. I remember one evening after a school event when my mother beamed with pride as she told her, "Samantha, that was an amazing presentation. You're so smart, and you're going to do great things in life." I stood nearby, holding my small science fair certificate, hoping someone would notice, but no one did. This wasn't unusual. Samantha was like the sun in our family, always shining brightly, while I felt like just another shadow in her light. She got all the newest things, shiny gadgets, stylish clothes, while I was left with her old, worn-out hand-me-downs. Family gatherings always seemed to turn into celebrations of Samantha's success. "Did you hear about Samantha's SAT scores?" My dad would proudly ask our relatives. "She's in the top percentile, and she's also president of the debate club," while everyone clapped and praised her. I sat quietly, knowing that my decent grades and my role as the treasurer of the environmental club would never get the same kind of recognition. At home, when I helped my mother with simple chores like folding laundry, she would gently push me toward more practical jobs. "There's nothing wrong with honest work," she would say, hinting that she didn't believe I was meant for something bigger. It hurt to know that, in their eyes, I wasn't someone with a bright future. I was just someone who should take the safest, simplest path. Over time, I started to believe it too. As the years passed, the difference in how my parents treated us became clearer. When Samantha got accepted into college, it was a huge celebration. They opened a bottle of wine, planned a special dinner, and kept talking about how proud they were. "Our brilliant girl is going to one of the best colleges in the city," my mother said, her face glowing with joy. I watched from the side, feeling invisible as usual. Then, when it was my turn to talk about college, the response was completely different. Even though I worked hard in school and participated in clubs, my parents didn't take me seriously. "Be realistic, Luna," my mother said with a sigh. "We can't afford college for you, and honestly, you're not really college material." I frowned, but we had money for Samantha's tuition, I pointed out. That was different, my father said without hesitation. "Samantha had outstanding grades. You're more suited for something else. Maybe you can help out at the cafe." His words crushed me. It wasn't about money. They had just never believed in me. They had already decided what my future should be, without even giving me a chance. That night, I sat alone in my room, crying, but deep down, I knew I couldn't just accept this. I went back to them later that evening, my voice shaky but determined. I could work while studying, I said. We could take out a loan or ask relatives for help. I promise I'll pay back every penny, with interest. We could even sign a legal agreement. But my mother's response was cold. "We don't borrow money. It's against our principles, and we're not making an exception for you. You need to accept this and find a job." That night was one of the hardest of my life, but as the hours passed, my sadness turned into something stronger, determination. If my parents wouldn't support me, I had to find someone who would. The next day, I went to visit my grandparents. Sitting at their old kitchen table, I told them everything, my voice breaking as I spoke. "I can't give up on my dream of going to college," I said desperately. My grandfather looked at me, his expression a mix of sadness and anger. "We don't have much," he admitted, "but we'll see what we can do. No grandchild of mine will have their dreams thrown away." The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. I was crushed when the bank rejected our loan application. But then came the biggest shock of all. My grandfather made a huge sacrifice. He sold their old country home, along with the land it stood on, just so I could afford my tuition. His love and belief in me meant more than anything. I chose to study investment management in a city far away from home, far from the doubts and limitations my parents had placed on me. The day I left, my parents didn't even come to see me off, but my grandparents did. My grandmother held me tight, and my grandfather, though trying to hide his tears, gave me a proud nod. From that moment on, I kept my distance from my parents. On school breaks, I stayed with my grandparents, grateful for their sacrifice and their belief in me. After 5 years of hard work, I finally graduated with my degree. I came back to my hometown, hoping to start fresh, but the job market was tougher than I expected. After months of searching, I finally got a position at a small trading company. It wasn't the big firm I had dreamed of, but it was a start. I rented a modest apartment and was proud to be earning my own way. Then, out of the blue, Samantha called me. Her voice was overly sweet, like she was trying too hard. "It's been so long. You should come over for dinner this weekend. We have so much to catch up on." A part of me wanted to believe things had changed, that maybe we could finally connect as sisters, as equals. I couldn't have been more wrong. I stood before them, facing them fully for the first time in years. My parents, who had once dismissed me as an afterthought, now sat before me with pleading expressions. The contrast between their past neglect and their current desperation was glaring. They needed $250,000, and they had come to me to ask for it. As they explained their predicament, my mind drifted back to the sacrifices my grandfather had made to send me to college. He had sold his beloved property just so I could get an education, while my parents had saved every penny they could for Samantha. I thought about all the times they had told me I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worth investing in, and now, here they were, asking for my help. "That's not fair," my mother protested, her voice rising in frustration as I pointed out the hypocrisy. I met her gaze, my voice steady. "No, what's unfair is that you're only here because you need something from me. You didn't even invite me to Samantha's engagement party. We haven't spoken in years, and suddenly, you need $250,000? I walked to the door and pulled it open wide. "I don't loan money on principle. I believe that's a family tradition, isn't it?" My mother's face turned red with anger. "How dare you throw our own words back at us after everything we've done for you?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Everything you've done for me? Please, leave now." As they walked out, my mother muttered about my ingratitude while my father avoided my eyes. The moment they were gone, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in my life, I had stood my ground against them. This was my space, my life, and they had no control over it. The next day, my phone rang. It was Samantha. She didn't waste time on greetings. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded. "Mom told me what happened yesterday. How could you be so selfish?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the city skyline. "Selfish? That's funny, coming from you. We're family, Luna. Since when does family treat each other like this?" I sighed, my patience running thin. Family helps each other, right? Where was this family when you all mocked my job, called me a beggar, and laughed at where I lived? Was I family then? Samantha scoffed. "That was different. We were just teasing. You're being ridiculous now." "No, what's ridiculous is that none of you spoke to me for years, until you needed something. If you're so desperate for money, why don't you ask your parents? After all, they are your real family." "You're bitter and ungrateful," she exploded. "You think you're so much better than us now with your fancy apartment and big job? You're still the same pathetic little sister who was never good enough." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, surprised to realize that her words didn't hurt, they just made me tired. A week later, I sat at my grandparents' dining table for our usual Sunday dinner. The room was unusually quiet. Finally, my grandfather spoke. "Your parents called us yesterday." I set my fork down. "Let me guess, they asked for money for the wedding?" Grandma nodded. "They're getting desperate. Your mother had a lot to say about family obligations when we told them we're retired and don't have that kind of money." Grandpa sighed. "She even had the nerve to suggest we sell the car you gave us." I blinked. "She wanted you to sell your gift?" That's when I hung up on her, Grandpa said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "I told her that unlike some people, we don't sell gifts from family members who actually care about us." Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We sat in understanding silence. We didn't need words to express how much we meant to each other. Word traveled fast in our small town. Within weeks, my parents' version of events had spread. I overheard people gossiping at the grocery store. "Did you hear about the younger daughter?" a woman whispered. "Got a fancy job and now she thinks she's too good for her own family." I simply smiled and kept walking. I knew the truth. That was enough. During church visits with my grandparents, relatives cast disapproving glances my way. One evening, my Aunt Salma called, her voice heavy with judgment. "Your mother told me you wouldn't even let her into your apartment when she visited. How could you treat your mother like that?" I could have explained how they only reached out when they needed money, how they never supported me, how they ridiculed me, but I had learned something valuable. Defending yourself against toxic people only feeds their narrative. So, I let the rumors swirl around me like leaves in the wind and focused on my career and my grandparents. 3 weeks before the wedding, Samantha made one last attempt. She showed up unannounced, wearing her most expensive outfit and a forced smile. "Luna, we need to talk," she said, walking past me into my living room. "This has gone on long enough. We're sisters, we shouldn't be fighting." I crossed my arms. "Why are you here, Samantha?" "To make peace," she smiled sweetly, "and to help you understand. Marlon's parents aren't just rich, they're old money. The wedding has to be perfect." I waited for the real reason. "The final payments are due next week. If Mom and Dad can't contribute, it'll be humiliating. Marlon's family will think they're broke. It'll reflect badly on me. So this visit isn't about making peace, it's about money." "Well, yes," she admitted, touching my arm. "Luna, please, you're my sister, help me, we need to make a good impression." I gently removed her hand, walked to the door, and opened it. "I don't care about impressing Marlon's parents. I don't care about your perfect wedding, and I definitely don't care what any of you think anymore." "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed. "You'll regret this." I smiled. "No, Samantha, for the first time in my life, I know I won't." Days later, I got a text from Abigail, an old college friend. "Your parents finally had to admit to Marlon's family that they couldn't afford their share. It was apparently quite a scene. I hadn't expected a wedding invitation, and none came. My grandparents received one but politely declined. Instead, we spent that Saturday enjoying a quiet picnic in their backyard. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold, I felt nothing but peace. Some bridges, once burned, should remain as ashes, a testament to the boundaries we set to protect our dignity and happiness.